Hello viewers, today we're working on a 2006 Mazda 3 with the 2.3 liter engine, and we are going to be replacing the thermostat and housing because it's leaking. Welcome back to the Moose Mobile Auto Repair channel. And so today we're just going to be replacing the thermostat and housing because it has been leaking on this vehicle for quite some time. And so finally the customer has approved to do the work. So we are going to be replacing it today. And just recently, I just got my fancy headlamp gear so that I would be able to film the videos a lot better. It's quite blinding on the video. So I'm just going to turn this off. So this one is probably going to make things a little easier to film the videos and just a little bit better in the lighting quality and to make it easier for myself. So the first thing you want to do first is to take off the engine cover. So the first thing you want to do is to draw yourself a routing diagram for the drive belt before you remove it. So this one takes a 13 millimeter. So you can use a wrench or a socket and a ratchet. So just push towards the vehicle, towards the rear of the vehicle. So just push, and then you'll be able to get the belt off and slowly relieve the tension and take off the belt. And because that I'm not replacing the belt or anything, and it's not going to be in the way, instead of me taking the belt off completely, I'm just going to take it off slightly and hang it up with a bungee cord. So now I'm going to slowly relieve the tension. You don't want to relieve the tension too quickly, because then that's going to damage the mechanism inside the tensioner. So you want to do it very slowly. So I'm just going to put this back here and just going to hang up the belt with a bungee cord. So I just added some tension to the drive belt. So you can just hang it up on the hood over here, or somewhere in the holes over there or something. So I'm just keeping it like this to make things easier, so I don't need to reroute the drive belt because I'm not replacing it. So I'm just going to be reusing the same belt. So while the belt is off the tensioner, it's probably a good idea to have a look at the pulleys, see if there's any excessive play in the pulleys or any noises. And as you are relieving the tension on the tensioner, or when you are taking off and putting on the belt, you want to check to see if there's any like binding or anything like that, or if it's seized up, and then you would probably have to replace the tensioner. So there are 3 bolts for the tensioner. They are 12 millimeters. So we are going to uh, remove them now. I'm just going to loosen up the bolts first. This one has been serviced in some years. I think I added like grease onto it. You can add like anti-seize or, or dielectric grease or something to prevent to prevent the bolts from seizing up in the future if there's any issues. Take off the tensioner out of the way to get it out of the way. These bolts they're all the same bolts. So here's the tensioner. You can have a better look at this, a close inspection, see if there's any issues. There are sometimes the spring and the damper, the mechanism inside, they wear out. So sometimes if you see that this part that it sticks out and it's not straight, and then you know that there's a problem with the tensioner. So if there's any, typically you'll see something, it should be straight. So if it looks like that it's on an angle, then the mechanism or the bushing is worn out. It's hard to show you guys in this video because there isn't anything wrong with this particular one. And then over here you can see that it has an arrow and the 3 marks here. So typically the tensioner should be, this arrow should be between these the outside and the inside marks. So this arrow should be in between these the two end marks. The arrow should be in between there. Now, if this arrow is outside that range, then it would mean that the tensioner is worn out. Sometimes it could be that the belt is worn out. So you can't test this while this is off of the vehicle. You have to test it while it's on the vehicle and with the belt on in order to properly test it. Right now the arrow is outside the range. I forgot to mention earlier that if you want, you can drain the coolant from the radiator. There's usually like a plastic screw somewhere at the bottom of the radiator, but I don't normally like to remove those the drain screws because often the seal, they get damaged when you remove the screw or the drain valve or the petcock valve. So when you remove that screw, sometimes the seal will get damaged, and then you will have a leak afterwards. So if you want, I think on what's better is that you should remove the lower radiator hose and drain it from there instead, and that's a lot safer to do. But I'm just going to leave the coolant as it is. I'm just going to remove the pressure cap to relieve the pressure in the system. Engine is not really that hot at the moment. Just make sure that the engine has cooled down first before you do any work. I'm just going to be removing these two hoses from the thermostat housing, and I'm just going to drain the coolant from there. This vehicle has already had multiple services for the cooling system, so I'm not going to drain it completely from the radiator, but a majority of coolant is going to come out from the hoses here, so you probably don't need to drain the coolant if you don't want to. It's probably a bit hard to show you guys, but you can see a little bit of coolant that's leaking just under the thermostat housing area. You probably will not be able to see it from here because it's a very slow leak, and it's been leaking for many years, but now it's getting a lot worse. Also, I forgot to mention that if you wanted to, you can take the belt completely off and to have a look at the pulleys, have a look at the water pump to see if there's any noise or if there's any play, if there's any noise or any play in the water pump, and if it's leaking or anything, then it's probably a good idea to replace it now as you have all of this stuff off. So it's probably a good idea. So before you drain the coolant, you probably want to use a plastic bag to cover up the alternator so you don't damage the alternator. You can try to put a plastic bag underneath there if you're able to. So try your best to cover up the alternator with a plastic bag of some sort, because you don't want to get any of the coolant onto the alternator, because that could damage it. So we are just going to remove these clamps out of the way. I'm just going to remove the small one first. So I have a special hook tool to remove these hoses. You need to carefully to slide these underneath the hose to take the hose off. So it will make things a lot easier when you're doing coolant hoses. I have the camera in the way, so it's making things a tiny bit difficult. It's coming out now. Make sure you have a drain pan ready to catch the coolant. I probably forgot to say that earlier. So make sure you have something to catch the coolant as it's draining out. And then we still have to remove the large hose This is the, I believe this is part of the lower radiator hose, I believe. So now we're going to remove the large hose. I'm trying to squeeze the clamp and pull the hose out at the same time, if I'm able to. Have to be careful with the connector on the intake over here. Need to watch out for that. I'm still trying to get this out. It's a wee bit of a small challenge. Trying to push against the hose off of the housing just to make it easier to get off. I think I should be able to get it out after that. Try to grab it from underneath with my other hand. It's coming out now because the camera was in the way. So I'm holding the tension down with my left hand on the clamp because I'm not able to move it, and using my other hand to get this out. Now it's out. So in order to get the thermostat housing off, there's a total of 3 bolts. So they're 8 millimeters each one. So the camera is in the way, so I may have to do it off camera. Just some advice for you guys. The last bolt that's at the bottom, you'll be able to see it from underneath, from where the intake manifold is and where the opening. So instead of having a look here, because you can't see it, you can see the bolt from underneath over here. So right now I'm having a hard time trying to get to the 2 rear bolts. So the trick is for this is to get something like this, a 1/4-inch ratchet with a long extension and a regular shallow 8 mil socket, and to work from underneath the intake area. So what I'm doing is I just go from underneath. I just bring the ratchet down, go from underneath. I cracked the bolt loose already, so just go under here and just work like this. And then I think you can do the same for the bottom one. Do the bottom one as well. Just trying to see on where it is. So you can do the same for the bottom bolt as well. Just make sure you're on that bolt all the way. You don't want to to round off or strip any of those bolts. The worst case scenario, if you're really having a hard time, if you're like a do it yourselfer, or if you're having a hard time, you can always remove the entire intake manifold, but it's just going to create a lot more work for yourself. You can do that if you want, but that's not necessary. So I'm going to continue removing the bolts now. So I was saying earlier, you just need to bring the ratchet down here at the very bottom, and you'll be able to remove the rear bolts. So I'm working like this from underneath the intake area. So you need to work this way in order to get the bolts out. If you're not able to get it out from through the opening here. Yeah, the bolts are pretty rusty on these ones. I have a magnet over here, so I'm probably going to catch it with a magnet as I'm taking the bolts out. I like to start with the hardest ones first, because if you do the easy one first, you might not be able to get the harder ones out after that. So use a magnet to get it out. We are going to do the very bottom one now. So now I'm trying to get the bolt out now. It's loose. So we're going to grab a magnet to grab it. And I want it to drop. And then we have the last one that needs to be taken out. Last one. Sometimes you may need to push the housing inwards in order to loosen up the last bolt, because all of the weight and the force will be pushed against that one bolt that's loose. So you need to hold down the housing in order to get it out. This one you can just take off by hand, because that one is the easy access. Excuse me, that one is the easy access bolt. Now we're just gonna remove the housing. Should be able to come out free. So now, as you can see, this is the old one. You can see how the seal is all like worn out, and it's all mushed. Hard to see if there's any cracking on the plastic itself. You can see that the seal is all all squished. So make sure you compare the parts, the old and the new. Just make sure that everything is the same. This one is an integrated uh, thermostat and housing, so it comes in all in one piece. So before we install this, we are going to lubricate the seal with some fresh coolant, and we are going to clean the surfaces on the block first. So what you want to do is to clean the surfaces on the block first before you install the new housing, because if you don't, then it's going to leak. I'm just using the 3M Scotch Brite. I'm going to cut this up to size so I'm able to fit it down there. It's safe for aluminum blocks. So I'm going to clean the surfaces now with this, with the Scotch Brite. So I'm going to go off camera, and then after I'm done the cleaning, I'll bring you guys back. So now I'm done cleaning the surfaces. I'm just going to spray some brake cleaner to clean the area down, and we are going to do a wipe, and then later I'm going to clean the bolts up with the either with the wire wheel or with the bench grinder that I have. So I'm going to clean up the bolts off camera, and then we are going to install the new housing. I want to give this a quick wipe after you spray it down with some brake cleaner. So I cleaned up the bolt for this one, and I did the other two off camera. So I just wanted to make sure I clean off a majority of the rust. There's still a tiny bit more, so I'm going to clean that off again. So you just want to make sure that the threads are fairly clean so that they will go in easy. They will go in easy and they won't seize up in the future. So now I clean the surfaces down on the block, just make sure you give it a quick wipe before you install the housing. Make sure there's no dirt or anything in the way. Just double check that the housing is clean. There's no dirt on there before you install the new part. So I lubricated the seal over here with brand new coolant. So make sure you lubricate the seal because you don't want to install it dry. So now we are going to install the housing. Now this housing only goes on one way, so you don't need to worry about the jiggle valve or the jiggle pin, the gold one or the yellow one that you see there. So you don't need to worry about that. You just need to install this the way it is, and then you're good. So we are going to install this now. Let's get the hose out of the way, interfering with the installation. It's probably a good idea to tuck the hose out of the way so it's not interfering with the installation or anything. So we're gonna install this now. We need to try to get the first bolt in, so it's gonna be the opposite. So we're gonna put the easy one in first, which is the one in the very front. These bolts are the same size, so it does not matter and which one you put in first. Just going to try to start the bolts. Just trying to hold the weight of the housing so I can get the bolt started. And then later we're going to to snug and torque these bolts up afterwards. You don't want to tighten it down all the way yet until you have all of the bolts started. Now, in order to get those two rear bolts in without dropping the bolts, there's a trick that I learned years ago. So for the hard to access bolts, and if you think that you are going to drop them, so so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a piece of a shop towel like this and put the bolt in here. Put the bolt all the way in like this, and then you won't be able to drop it. And so when you insert this in, and then you take it out, the shop towel will just come off after that. So if you're having a hard time trying to get the bolts started, uh, try doing this, and it should be a lot easier. So now I'm going to try to start the bolt. You will need to line up the bolt in the hole, and that's the reason why you don't want to tighten up all of the bolts up yet until you got all of them in. So once you got that in, you can remove that shop towel out of the way. And that's almost all the way in, and now we are going to do the bottom one. We're going to do the bottom one. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt, but as soon as you get the hang of it, it's fairly easy after that. The access can be a little bit aggravating sometimes, but after you have done this job a while, after you have done this job for once or twice, and then you will be able to get the hang of it after that. So it can be intimidating at first, but that's the way how cars are. Usually, they're sometimes there to intimidate you, but really, it's not all that difficult. So just trying to thread in that bolt now, get it all the way through. And we're going to snug the bolts up after. In case that shop towel is still on the bolt, you can just use a long screwdriver to to get it off. So now we're just going to snug up the bolts carefully, and then we're going to torque it afterwards. You want to work in stages in a crisscross pattern. You want to make sure you don't over tighten these. They are very small bolts, so it's very easy to over tighten and break them. I'm going to do the very bottom one now in the back and tighten that up, and then we're going to do the top one, and then we're going to torque it after that. I'm going to tighten the top one in the back. So they're all snug now. So we're just going to get the torque spec and and tighten them up. So the torque specs for the housing is between 71 to 101 inch pounds. So we're probably gonna do like a happy medium. Uh, Probably going to torque it to 96 inch pounds. That's roughly 8 foot pounds. So for every 12 inch pounds is 1 foot pound. Now the minimum torque here says 71 inch pounds, so that's roughly 5.92 foot pounds rounded up. So roughly 6 foot pounds. So for the Mazda vehicles, they usually have a range for their bolts. So we're probably gonna do 96 inch pounds, and then yeah, that's it. I forgot to mention that earlier. If you wanted to, you can put some uh, anti-seize on the bolts if you want to, but I just install them dry. It doesn't really matter. So if you put a tad bit of anti-seize, you may need to adjust the torque slightly, but it's not absolutely necessary. But anyhow, so I'm going to proceed to torque this to 96. So I'm going to start at 71 first to be on the safe side. And I'm just going to work the bolts through because they're still not 100% tight. So I'm going to work them through in stages. That one clicked. I'm going to do the bottom one. I'm just a little bit paranoid because I don't want anything to break. The last thing you want is any bolts to break on the engine, and then you'll be in for a lot of serious trouble. So we're probably gonna do 80 inch-pounds because this stuff is giving me a little bit of anxiety. I don't want to break the bolts, so I'm a little bit paranoid. So I'm just gonna torque it just a tad bit, but as long as you are within the range, you should be fine. That's 80. I'm working in stages because I don't want to break anything. So that's 80 inch-pounds there, and we're gonna do the other two. I'm working in a somewhat of a star shape or crisscross pattern or fashion. Want to tighten the bolts up evenly. And then now we're going to do 96. That's 96. Back to the very bottom one because I want to tighten this up evenly. I recommend to tighten these up always in stages. I always recommend to tighten these up in stages so that way you don't break anything. You want to tighten everything up evenly, and typically you won't have any issues. And the last one, very top. Here you go. So now everything is all torqued up. So we are going to install the hoses back. We're going to install the probably do the large one first, and then we're going to do the small one. I believe that one is like a bypass hose or something. So we're just going to be reusing these clamps. Sometimes you can reuse them. There won't be any issues. Um, I'm just going to reuse these because I've had a lot of issues with the warm gear style clamps, and there's been a lot of controversy with the style clamps. But I do know that the worm gear clamps, they don't apply even pressure on the hose, and sometimes you always have to keep on adjusting them and tightening them, and sometimes you'll never be able to get the proper tension on the hoses, especially if it's a new hose as well, because the tension needs to be periodically adjusted every time. And so these the factory spring clamps are usually the best because they automatically adjust the tension when needed. So it's not too much and it's not too little. It just applies the exact amount of tension, and it applies even pressure on the hose, so there won't be issues. But a lot of shops these days, they will use worm gear clamps, and even myself, I use worm gear clamps because there isn't anything else available, and sometimes you're not even able to get these style spring clamps uh, from the dealership. The dealership sometimes don't even carry them. We're going to install the hose back now. I forgot to mention that sometimes the spring clamps, they lose tension over time, and so sometimes you're not able to reuse them. But if they still look okay and they still maintain the tension, then it's not a bad idea to reuse them. Put a little dab of coolant. A couple of drops on the alternator is not gonna really do much. I'm going to try this again. Really hard to get the hose in with this style of clamp. Should be able to get it in now, hopefully. I'm not breaking anything, of course. Just trying to move this out of the way. So I don't have to fight. Trying to get this guy in. It's a pretty bad design that Mazda decided to put the alternator right beneath the thermostat housing. Is very smart, because if that thermostat housing leaks enough, it's just gonna drip all the coolant in the alternator and damage the alternator. I guess the manufacturers didn't really think about that one, so I guess they don't really care much. But anyways, back to reality as usual, and Just trying to get this guy back in here. The manufacturer is always coming up with like stupid and clever ways to come up with something and reinvent the wheel, whatever. Manufacturers always like to do something. Yeah. Just trying to get slide in the slide on the clamp. Try your best to reinstall the clamp the same way it came off, so that way it will not leak. Because usually these clamps, they leave a mark on the hose, so you want to put it in the same spot, because if you don't, sometimes the hose can leak later on. I'm trying to get it very close to what it was before, and that should be good now. The next guy over here should be easier than the other one. So slide him in till it reaches the piece there. That should be good. I'm going to tighten up that clamp. That's good. I'm going to move that clamp and tighten her up. Sorry about the camera. I do have the other type style of tool for the clamps, but it did not work for this application. So I think it's easier to just use this style clamp. You can probably get this from Amazon. This is from the Snap-on truck, the Blue Point brand. It's like a lower end type brand of version of Snap-on. So don't forget to remove the plastic bag. Get that out of the way. And if you need to, you can, before you remove the plastic bag, you can wash the area up with a little bit of some water before you remove the plastic bag, and then you should be all right. It's probably best that you wash down the area now, because later you won't be able to put water, otherwise you may damage the alternator. So I'm probably going to cover up the alternator with a fresh plastic bag, and then clean everything up, rinse everything down with water, and I'm going to reinstall the drive belt tensioner. So we're going to remove the plastic bag out of the way now. So we're going to go ahead, reinstall the drive belt tensioner. Just make sure that when you are installing this back, that the dowels, they line up on these two ends. I'm going to reinstall that back. I have to see on what the torque specs are, and what the torque specs are for this one. I was having a hard time trying to find the torque spec, so I might just have to tighten these down snug But I think they're roughly maybe like 15 to 20 foot-pounds. If I'm able to find the torque spec, I'll put it on the screen somewhere for you guys to see. So we're just going to tighten this snug. These don't need to be on extremely tight. You just need to tighten them down like okay tight or snug, and you're good. Like 15 or 20 foot-pounds maximum, and you should be okay. So I'm just going to tighten this down. It's a 12 millimeter. Just need to tighten them down snug. I like to use a smaller ratchet so I'm able to get the feel for these bolts. So I will put the torque spec if I'm able to find it. Otherwise, just tighten these down just snug, and then you should be okay. You don't want to over tighten these bolts. You want to work in a star shape or crisscross a pattern to tighten them down evenly. And also, if you want, you're able to use a standard wrench to tighten these up or to loosen them. So you can just tighten them snug, and then you're all good to go. I just wanted to show this for the sake of demonstration. So we're going to reinstall the drive belt. Just gonna grab the 13 mil wrench, remove the bungee cord. Make sure you have tension on this. So I had to readjust the drive belt. This one is not a difficult one. So we're gonna relieve the tension, reinstall the belt. It might be difficult to get the belt through on this pulley because the wrench it may be in the way. So we may need to put it on the water pump pulley last. If you're not able to put it on there, because there's no way I'm gonna be able to get that on. So I'm probably gonna have to put it on the water pump last. I think, unless I can get this inside here and the wrench on top. So like this, I guess. You're gonna push towards the vehicle, towards the rear. You push. May need to recycle that again and adjust the wrench. You can use a ratchet too if you want. Let's see. Now pushing it down. Should be able to get the belt on now. You just want to be careful with the tensioners because sometimes they can break. If they are no good, they can break. So you need to watch out for that. So the belt is on. Just make sure that the belt are on the pulleys properly and they're not riding against the edge of the pulleys. So you want to make sure it's on the pulleys 100% before you start the engine. So now I have the belt on, and you can see that the indicator marks the arrow is within the range, but you would have to start the vehicle first to verify that the tensioner and or the belt is still okay. So as long as the arrow is between those ranges, then it should be fine. So now we are going to top up the coolant. I'm using the green universal coolant. Prestone says it's for Mazdas. So So I'm going to use on whatever is in here, and then I have another jug of the coolant. So I'm just gonna use this because this is what I have from last time. So I'm going to fill up the cooling system now, and I'm going to show you the bleeding procedures. So here's the other jug. I try to order the same one. I don't know if this is the same exact thing, but it's the green coolant. It said do not add water. It's ready to use. It's 50-50 pre-mixed. So we're going to fill it up. And while we run the vehicle, we are going to double check for any coolant leaks, just to make sure that we did a good job, and then we should be all good after that. So I'm going to let the level to settle a tiny bit. I can see some air bubbles over here. Sometimes I like to push on to squeeze on the hoses to circulate the coolant through, because this will help. This will help for it will make the bleeding procedure a lot faster and easier when you squeeze the hoses, because the fluid will displace the air bubbles when you squeeze the hoses. So now you can see the coolant is dropping. So this will just give you a head start with the bleeding procedure. So it'll make things a lot easier. So I'm going to top it up. I'm going to keep on topping it up. Just gonna make sure there's no leaks before I start the engine up. Make sure there's no drips. And then it'll be okay to start the vehicle up. And so now I'm just going to start the vehicle up. We're just going to let the vehicle idle. These are the instructions from service information. I just copied and pasted them into the document file. So it said start the engine and idle it until the thermometer indicator is in the center when the engine is at below 1500 RPM. So we are going to let it idle, and then we will proceed from there. So I'm just going to run the heat on full blast, so everything on maximum hot on number 4. Take off recirculation. It'll be over here, so it'll be coming through the vents. So just let the engine idle, and then after it reaches operating temperature, we will continue and follow the procedures. So now we have reached operating temperature, so we're going to bleed the air by following the procedures below. And it says at this time, be careful of the coolant temperature to prevent overheating. So run the engine at 2500 RPM for 5 minutes. So run the engine RPM for 5 minutes at 2500, and then run the engine at 3000 for 5 seconds, and then idle. Then repeat the procedure twice. And then we also have to double check the coolant level to make sure that the level is okay. So maintain 2500 RPM for 5 minutes, and then we will continue from there. So now we're going to run the engine at 3000 for 5 seconds. And then idle. And then it says repeat steps 1 and 2 twice. Run the engine at 2500 for 5 minutes. Run the engine at 3000 for 5 seconds. Then idle. So you need to do that twice. It doesn't say how long to idle, but we'll probably idle for some time. And then we will continue the procedure. You will need to double check the coolant, the level, to make sure the level is okay, or if you need to remove a coolant and just go from there. I'm trying to hurry up because the customer, they need their vehicle ASAP, so I'm kind of rushed at the moment. So I'm gonna try my best to finish up the video here. So we're going to do 2500 for 5 minutes again after we idle for about a minute, and then we'll continue the procedures. As you are doing this, you want to make sure that the engine does not overheat. If the engine for any reason overheats, you will need to shut the vehicle off and to let it cool down, readjust the coolant level. After it's cooled down a tiny bit, you can restart the engine and continue with the bleeding procedure. So we're at 2500 RPM. We are going to go to 3000 now for 5 seconds. And then we are going to idle for probably a minute and repeat the procedure again. 2500 for 5 minutes, 3000 for 5 seconds, and then idle. It said to repeat the procedure twice, so just keep on repeating it until you are getting good heat. Make sure it doesn't get cold. If it gets cold, you will need to keep on repeating the procedure. The heat, it was strong and then it got a tiny bit cold, so I have to keep on repeating the procedure until all of the air bubbles are gone and until I have good heat. Also, just make sure that that you are topping up the coolant periodically for every procedure. So every time you do 2500 for 5 minutes, and then 3000 for 5 seconds, and then idle. While the vehicle is idling, you want to check the coolant level. Make sure it's topped up, or if you need to take a coolant out and readjust the level if you need to. So just now I had to top up the coolant again because it ran low. So you may need to top it up from time to time. And after you are done, it's set to stop the engine, inspect the coolant level. After the coolant temperature decreases, said water temperature gauge indicates C or less. So basically, the engine has to be pretty much stone cold, so you can recheck the level just to make sure everything is okay, and then that's it. It's saying to top it up if you need to. I'm just going to finish up topping up the coolant. Then going to close the pressure cap. And the customer has to go right now, so I'm sort of in a hurry. So I need to finish this up. So it's all blood. Now, typically, you need to wait for the vehicle to cool down. And then once the vehicle has cooled down, after you are done the bleeding procedure, uh, you will need to readjust the coolant level to make sure everything is okay, and then that's it. So now it's all done. I topped up the coolant level. I'm just going to wash down that area for any spillage, and then that's it. I'm going to go for a road test now and confirm that the heat is good and that the engine is not overheating. And then I'm going to bring it back after the customer comes back from their trip. I'm going to re-inspect everything just to make sure there's no more leaks, and then that's it. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to give it a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already a subscriber, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and take care.